Hello everyone, I am Abrar Indawi and I am subjected to report or discuss about the skill acquisition theory by Robert DeKeyser. There is a connection between cognitive psychology and skill acquisition theory. Theoretical development in the field of cognitive psychology have yielded important insights into the nature of skill acquisition. This theory conceptualized skill learning as a multi-stage cognitive process, and one of the leading specialists in the study of skills acquisition is Dr. J.R. Anderson. Over the last 25 years, Dr. Anderson created a theory of cognition that is specific enough to be simulated by a computer. By using this simulation, he has been able to understand the way in which humans organize and relate knowledge to skilled behavior. Now let us look at the background of skill acquisition theory. The scientific roots of skill acquisition theory can be found in different branches of psychology, from behaviorism to cognitivism and the connectionism. Now, this theory draws on Anderson's or Dr. J.R. Anderson's model, the adaptive control of thought or ACT model, which itself is a kind of cognitive stimulus response theory. And according to some, it is a new Piagetian theory that amalgamates elements of both cognitive and behavioristic theories. In second language acquisition, there are a number of theories which have been devised based on the model of skill acquisition in cognitive psychology. Now, this theory or the skill acquisition theory falls under the category of general human learning, which focuses on language learning as a process of human learning. Human learning. In other words, learning according to skill acquisition theory, that learning a second language in view of such theories is considered to be like learning any other skill such as playing musical instrument. So here is the basic claim of skill acquisition theory. So skill acquisition theory that the learning of a wide variety of skills shows a remarkable similarity in development from initial presentation of knowledge through initial changes in behavior to eventual fluent, spontaneous, and largely effortless and highly skilled behavior, and that this set of phenomena can be accounted for by a set of basic principles common to the acquisition of all skills. Therefore, being said that skill acquisition is a form of learning where skill behaviors can become routinized and even automatic under some conditions. So before we proceed to the main topic, please remember that the following terminologies for aids of understanding. We have here controlled process. Controlled process means it remains under the control of the learner and usually requires a large amount of processing capacity and more time for activation. While automatic process is a quick and it demands relatively little processing capacity. We also have here implicit knowledge and explicit knowledge. The implicit knowledge is a tacit and intuitive, whereas explicit knowledge is conscious. Implicit knowledge is procedural, whereas explicit knowledge is declarative. And lastly, implicit knowledge is only evident in learners' verbal behavior, whereas explicit knowledge is verbalizable. So let's go back to the basic claim of skill acquisition theory. It has been said that skill acquisition is a form of learning or skill behavior can become routinized and even automatic under some conditions. So in other words, this theory assigns rules for both implicit and explicit learning in second language acquisition. And as a second, in general, the theory of learning, it claims that adults commence learning something through largely explicit processes, and with subsequent sufficient practice and exposure will move into implicit process. Now let us look at this a diagram. Development within the theory of within a skill acquisition theory entails the utilization of declarative knowledge followed by procedural knowledge. With procedural knowledge optimization, and according to Richards, in general, that declarative knowledge for information of everybody, that declarative knowledge is conscious knowledge of facts, concepts, or ideas that can be stored as a propositions, while procedural knowledge refers to unconscious knowledge of how an activity is done. Now, in the context, let us define declarative knowledge in the procedural knowledge in the context of second language acquisition. Declarative knowledge tells us that to form present perfect tense, part of the verb have is followed by the past participle, and the past participle is formed by adding ed to the stand form. Now, learners using their declarative knowledge hold all this knowledge in memory and apply it each time they are required to use the tense. While procedural knowledge is the actually use of the said declarative knowledge. So here is the distinction of declarative knowledge from procedural knowledge. So basically, declarative knowledge is knowing what, and procedural knowledge is knowing how. Take note of that. Now, let us proceed to the 3 stages of skill acquisition process. So according to the skill acquisition theory, we have here 3 stages: that acquiring declarative knowledge, second will be learning the proceduralization, and lastly, acquiring procedural knowledge. So it is already embedded in the phrase that acquiring declarative knowledge, of course, gaining declarative knowledge, and second, which is the proceduralization of knowledge. In this stage, it includes that behavior, and it consists of conditions, action, pairs that state what is to be done under these certain circumstances. Now, fully automized procedural knowledge means, for instance, that in English, that one uses a third person is for singular verb without having to think about it. So in the third and final stage of skill acquisition, learners might or might not lose declarative knowledge of the rule. So we will finally discuss the relevance of skill acquisition theory in the second language acquisition, or SLA. First is declarative knowledge to procedural knowledge. So it is the relevance or a notion or an idea in the second language acquisition, because language cannot be performing without knowing first the what's, right? Because I have discussed earlier that declarative knowledge is knowing the what's, and procedural knowledge is knowing the how. So With the advent of outcome-based education, especially in the second language classrooms, it should be emphasizing that the goal of second language teaching and learning, and of course, the effect of instructions should be skill-based. While other theories put greater emphasis on procedural knowledge, skill acquisition theory, on the other hand, that put importance to both declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. Skill acquisition theory, as the name would suggest, should be based on skills. But this theory puts emphasis on importance of explicit declarative knowledge during the initial stages of learning. So declarative knowledge, if you based it on second language acquisition context, it refers to the explicit mental rules, whereas procedural knowledge, it refers to the knowledge about how to perform cognitive operations such as producing language with less or no effort by accessing items stored in your long-term memory. So, since we have talked about declarative knowledge, now the question is, how can we establish declarative knowledge? Now, implementing methodology that is consistent with skill acquisition theory means anchoring the relevant knowledge solidly in the student's mind at the outset. So, this can be best done by giving ample exposure to the material to be learned and making sure that the students have time to develop, test, and refine this knowledge. Explicit teaching will result in the maximum understanding, and since errors are common at this stage, this should be corrected. Hence, we have error correction. Another way to establish declarative knowledge is to incorporate the four skills or the four macro skills, which are reading, the writing, listening, and speaking. In this way, the teacher can encourage students to practice a certain structure in different ways without boring the students. Now, the teacher can introduce the target language or structure through listening and speaking activities that are practiced until the students have full comprehension. They can give, or teachers can give, oral presentation or performance role play by adding details or personalizing the content. By following the four skills path, students can practice communication in a way that provide the type of a repetition that will develop their skill without subjecting them to rote repetition. And to sum up declarative knowledge, we can be transformed into procedural knowledge through meaningful practice over many trials. So next, proceduralizing declarative knowledge. So according to Dr. G.R. Anderson's model, the associative stages are where learners coordinate the elements needed to translate declarative knowledge to procedural knowledge. Now, to do this, learners must perform the skill while keeping the relevant knowledge in mind so that they are eventually able to use the skill without having to refer back to the initial knowledge. So in short, students need to practice tasks until they have achieved automaticity. So second relevance, or a connection of skill acquisition theory, or to in the second language acquisition, or SLA, that it explains the role of practice and automation in language skill learning. Remember the rule of practice and automation in language skill learning. So according to the skill acquisition theory, declarative knowledge can be transformed into procedural knowledge through meaningful practice or over trials. But first, let us define practice. Practice is a repeated performance of the same or closely similar routines. That is, repeated practice with feedback promotes the acceleration of meaning, learning rather than the acquisition of mechanical skills, and thereby contributes to optimization. Basically, optimization of skill is the ability to get things right when no attention is available for getting them right. Meaning, practice will lead to optimization of knowledge and skill. Most of us have been urged our coaches or piano teachers. So optimization is a fundamental component of skill development. When a skill is newly learned, its performance takes up a great deal of conscious attention. For example, a practical example that novice drivers will only be able to change gears if they concentrate it on changing gears. But to become a skilled driver, you must be able to perceive what is happening both in the car and on the road, of course. But this can only be accomplished if your lower order skills like changing gears have been automated. When drivers automate gear changing, they are able to perform the action without even being aware that they are doing it, same as through with a language performance. Now, the role of automation in skills learning, especially in the language performance, is to free one's attention for tasks, which requires it. So basically, practice is needed for automation of knowledge, and also practice can decrease where action time and error rate. Moving on, the third importance of, I mean, connection of acquisition theory to second language learning is that skill acquisition theory puts emphasis on importance of declarative knowledge during the initial stages of language learning. So more communicative methodology were better but tended to lack of sufficient declarative knowledge or ignored the importance of error correction to help establish declarative knowledge. And also, it placed too much weight on structures but not enough on truly meaning communication. Indeed, with and the introduction of communicative approach, they appeared a strong tendency to overlook linguistic forms and to be done to the teaching of grammar. So this, according to DeKeyser, ignored the importance of establishing declarative knowledge, but with skill acquisition theory. Both declarative or both knowledge were both procedural and declarative knowledge were given equal importance. And according to Johnson, that in language teaching, in skill learning, he argued there that both declarative and procedural knowledge are part of language competence. So finally, we have come to the summary and conclusion of my report. So skill acquisition theory in the context of second language acquisition, or SLA, basically skill acquisition theory when used, second language acquisition is explained as gradual transition from effortful use to more automatic use of the target language, with the ultimate goal of achieving faster and more accurate processing of the language, brought up about the f- through practice and feedback in meaningful context. But also, skill acquisition theory falls under the category, as I have mentioned in the earlier part of my report, that skill acquisition theory falls under the category of general human learning, which focuses on language learning as a process of human learning. So, in other words, learning a second language in view of such theories is considered to be like learning the other skill. In addition, language teaching and learning that emphasize the acquisition of skill is not a radical departure from what most teachers are currently doing. As DeKeyser in the year 2018, he said that skill acquisition theory is not a blueprint for a new language method. It is not a change of direction, but it is an extension of the current second language acquisition approach. Skill learning is compatible with the communicative approach to language present in the communicative classroom. Skill acquisition theory is just, under or the somehow like another lens through which we can explore what we are already doing in our classroom. So, armed with this characterization of skill-based theory, we can now be considered the integration of skill acquisition into our classroom. I think that's everything. Thank you for listening.